Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another episode of Microsoft Flight Simulator, and today we are back on the Cessna Citation Longitude for a full flight tutorial following my newly released PDF guide. If you guys are interested in acquiring that guide, sit tight because there's an announcement coming up. If you are interested in acquiring my Overkill's Cessna Citation Longitude guide from Microsoft Flight Simulator, consider joining my Patreon site at level tier 2 or above. That's $10 or more, which will give you access to all of the Overkill tutorial guides. Please keep in mind with Patreon, you do not have to subscribe each and every month. Once you subscribe, you will be charged $10. You will have access to all of the guides, and if you wish, you can then cancel the subscription, and you will maintain access to Patreon until the first of the following month. So, with that in mind, let's talk about what this guide is. This guide gives you a full flight tutorial from Boston to Minneapolis. It also walks you through installing any modifications that I use for this aircraft, a full cockpit tutorial, breaking down how to create your flight plan using SimBrief, which is a free service, and then completing the flight successfully. If there are any questions, you're always welcome to give feedback, as joining my Patreon site gives you access to my Discord channel as well, giving you direct access and communication to me. So once again, if you guys are interested, please consider joining the Patreon. It definitely helps support the channel and keeps the content coming, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. All right, so now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get into starting today's flight. We are going to be following the same flight plan that we have in the guide here, which will be going from Boston Logan Airport into Minneapolis St. Paul. We're going to be using SimBrief as our dispatch system today in order to create our flight plan, which I will walk you guys through very shortly as soon as I get logged in here. Now, there may be some changes as far as the runway that we use, but all the procedures will be the same. Okay, but obviously with the runways, we're restricted to what the weather looks like today. So we are going to go from K Boston over to KMSP, Minneapolis St. Paul. We're going to find the C700 series. There it is, the Longitude. All right, here we have your climb profile. The climb profile is 250 knots below 10,000 feet, then accelerating to 270 knots. And then at approximately the late 20s, early 30,000s of feet, we will switch over to our Mach speed and accelerate to Mach 0.80 for the remainder of the climb. Once we get up to our climb speed, or our cruise speed, we'll be accelerating to Mach 0.82. Our descent profile we'll be first slowing the aircraft down to Mach 0.80, then descending down to approximately, again, 28 to 30,000 feet, in which we would switch over to indicated airspeed, travel at 290 knots, and then making sure that we're at 250 knots by no later than 10,000 feet, as that is a restricted speed for that airspace. Fuel factor, we're going to leave it as is. However, we want to make sure... Oh, they have changed this. How interesting. There we go. Reserve fuel. No, they didn't. I'm retarded. We're going to make sure we have enough fuel on board for an IFR flight in case we need to divert or orbit for any reason. So we're going to make sure for IFR flights we set this to 45 minutes. Registration number you can leave as is. FIN number, totally up to you. And let's go ahead and keep scrolling down. Scheduled flight time, we're looking at 3:15 hours, which it actually currently is. Departure using runway 15 right. That's very handy as we're parked right next to it. And expected arrival on runway 17 into Minneapolis. So this will be a deviation from the guide, but the procedure will remain the same. All right. And then extra fuel on board. If you want to take extra fuel above the reserve fuel, this is where you would set that here. We do not need to worry about that. We're going to set our cruise altitude today at 45,000 feet. The guide does say 44,000 feet, but again, this is altitude. The procedure remains the same. Passengers, auto. I'm going to leave cargo at auto. Not too concerned about that today. And then our zero fuel weight, we can leave as auto as well. All right, so our departure, we have the Highland 5 going up to the Highland transition, then flying direct to Hannah. From Hannah, we'll jump onto the Q816 airway, exiting the airway at Kelty, and then joining onto the Q812. Exiting the Q812 at Zohan, and then flying direct to Idiom, in which we'll transition onto the Muscle 3 Star, or standard terminal arrival route. All right, and that is our flight plan for today, so we'll go ahead and hit Generate OFP. Okay, So now that we have our OFP here, we can either leave it at this screen. This is totally up to you guys. You have a couple of options here. If you are new to SimBrief or reading a flight plan, I do recommend clicking on this link here. What you can do here, if it loads, there it goes, is you can mouse over any section of the flight plan and it tells you what it is. Okay, I suppose it would probably help if I went a little bit slower rather than, you know, being a jerk like that. And then you can simply compare it to what you have here if there's a specific field that you're unsure of. All right, so that is very handy. But from here, what I like to do is hit print view PDF. I just find it easier to cycle through it and organize it. I'll close SimBrief out. I'm going to move this off to the side and we are ready to jump into the cockpit. All right, so jumping into the cockpit here, the first thing we're going to do is set our weights and balances. Now, the reason why I did not care about our cargo and our passenger load is because I'm going to set this according to what we have in the guide. I want to make sure I try to keep that as accurate as possible. So let's go ahead and first set our fuel load. You can switch it to gallons and pounds if you want, but really what we're interested in is this number down here. So we're going to set our fuel load at 7734, which I believe is 53%. Perfect. And we're going to set our payload down to 2597, or up to, I should say, which I think is 23%. Nope. What was I say? 2597. Boom. There we go. And then finally, just set our center of gravity. We're going to be looking at 33.9 today. Okay. Perfect. All right, which gives us, well, we'll set our MAC, excuse me, which sets our center of gravity to 30.79%. All right, so the aircraft's fueled, cargo's on board. Now we can go ahead and continue with the startup process. All right, so for our startup process, first we need to make sure the aircraft is safe to start. So let's go ahead and start by coming down here. Make sure the parking brake is set. Probably be easier to do it from this view here. We have our throttles at idle, our flaps are retracted, spoilers are retracted, standby power switch we can now set to on, which is down here. Battery switches, we're going to turn them both on, so there's left, there's right. Then we're going to come all the way to the back here, and we're going to flip our APU onto the start position. Typically, business jets do not use external power, as I have found out, as it tends to be more costly, believe it or not, as starting up the engines is a much simpler process. So what we're going to do is monitor our APU percentage right down here until we get to 100%. There's 100%, so we're going to come down here to the APU Gen switch it down to reset, and then to on, allowing power to be given to both buses. You want to make sure the bus tie is closed when using external power or the APU, as it connects both circuits. The APU by default only powers one side of the aircraft. So by closing the bus tie, it actually ties the two circuits together, providing power to both sides of the aircraft. All right. And then we want to make sure that our autopilot system is disengaged. Check our ICAS system here for any errors or warnings. And then come up top and turn on our recog lights. And if you're running in night operations, you would want your wing lights, floodlights if necessary. At this point, we can also arm our emergency lights and any internal lighting as you would desire. This is also a good time at this point to get your clearance and ATIS information. If you're using live weather, I will go ahead and use the in-game ATC to at least get our ATIS information, although I won't be using it for anything else as I can't get any audio. I don't know what's going on there, but unfortunately it won't show. And neither will the ATIS. Interesting. Let's see if I can get it on a different channel here. All right, well, that's just absolutely special now, isn't it? Let me make sure that is on. Yep. All right, so we have power. So at this point, all right, I'm not going to spend too much time fighting with Microsoft Flight Simulator. We'll just look it up, and we'll hope that it's correct. So just Googling KBOS meter, or METAR, I should say. Such a weird word, isn't it? Makes sense though. Altimeter's 3007 today. So let me go ahead and move the camera down a little bit easier for you guys. So we're going to come to our barrel knob here, and we're going to change this to 3007. Now, in this particular version of this aircraft, it also changes your standby altimeter, so you do not have to change them independently. Now we'll also simulate that we have received our transponder code, so we can come down to our radios here. We're going to select transponder, and we're going to leave it in the standby position, but we can enter in our code, and we'll say we got a transponder code of 2471. Sure, right? And press enter. Transponder code is set, but we leave it in the standby position for the moment. And now we're at the point where we can now very quickly enter in our flight plan. So for our flight plan today, we're going to go from the home screen, go to flight plan, add origin, Kilo Bravo Oscar Sierra, hit enter, destination of Kilo Mike Sierra Papa, press enter again. And now we can start entering in our procedures. So we can come right over here to the procedure menu, or you can get it straight from the home page. Departure, we're going to be departing on the Highland 5. This is our star. Transition is already included here as Highland being the last location of the star, so there is no actual secondary transition point. So from here, we're going to select our departing runway of runway 15 right, which again is extremely handy. You can preview the departure if you wish. You can hit show on map. And it helps if I pick a much better screen than that. There you go. And this gives you a bird's eye view of your departure. To remove it, simply hit show on map and hit off. I'm not going to be showing the charts as that is part of the Navigraph subscription today, and that's not included in the guide yet, but it will be. So I'm showing you guys how to do it simply by using the tools that are available without any purchase. So we hit load, and we can go back, hit the arrival. And for our arrival today, we're coming in on the Muscle 3. There it is. And our transition is going to be the idiom transition, and I will show you guys how we got to that. Bringing up Navigraph here, selecting KMS at MSP, going to the book, Hangar Star, Muscle 3. And you can see here is idiom right here is our first location. Now, how we're matching that is Boston, we're obviously coming down from the southeast, so we're coming in this direction, coming in here. We could use the other one up here. I'm not even trying to say that, but it would just take you a little bit further out of line for the star. Idiom just makes more sense based on a trajectory into the star itself. Okay? All right. So moving on, let's go ahead and check out our runway, which today I believe we're using runway 17. According to our flight plan. And then we're going to hit load. Now the guide has us coming in on 30 left, but again, the procedures will be the same. For the approach, coming in on ILS today, I'm finding the ILS 17. There's a localizer, RNAV, ILS 35. 17 doesn't have an ILS, so we are changing that. So let's go ahead and figure out what we would be looking at from the other direction. Let's see here, 1, 2 left, that's localizer. Looks like we only get ILS from one direction. All right, so in that case, we're going to stick to the 30 left as our runway, and we'll just adjust the weather accordingly. And ILS 30 left, and we're going to be using the hasty transition. And the only reason why I'm sticking with ILS today, guys, is because that's what's in the guide, so I wanted to make sure this video follows the procedural. Any of the other runways would require me to change the procedures and therefore not make the video that's supposed to go in handy with the guide a little bit on the useless side. All right, so we're going to come down here to runway 30 left. And again, where I'm getting hasty from is we're coming in from the southeast off the star, the standard terminal arrival route, and hasty is going to be the closest location. Hapton would take us further down south, and Giku up here would take us a little bit further up north than what we need to be. Hasty is going to be more of a direct line into the runway, which is why we are picking that as our transition point. All right. And then again, you could preview if you choose. In this case, we're just going to hit load, and we obviously don't want to activate it as we're nowhere near the approach. So at this point, we can go back to the home and complete the rest of our flight plan. For the remainder of our flight plan, now we have to enter in our airways and other waypoints. So bring in the guide over here for just a second so you guys can see what we got. first we have Highland, and I'll try to pull this down a little bit. There's Highland right there. The next spot is direct to Hannah, which we're going to add here as an en route waypoint. And then from here, we'll be following the rest of this. So just sort of store this in your brain, and hopefully it'll make sense as we move on. So from Highland, we're flying direct to Hannah. Highland with an asterisk, as long as we put Hannah afterwards. Is it H-A-N-N? Nope, I did that once before. It actually gave me a wrong one. Hannah, there we go. And if we wanted to throw another direct, okay, from here we're actually jumping onto an airway, but if we had another direct waypoint, we could actually put another asterisk here. Oops, back up. We could put another asterisk there and delimitate it with another waypoint. See, inserting after Hannah. We actually don't want to do that, so we'll just hit enter, and there's Hannah right there. Now from Hannah, we're going to be jumping on to the airways. So we're going to click on Hannah, load airway. You can see Hannah is our entry point onto the airway. Q816 is the only one available, so we're just going to select it, and the exit point today is going to be Kelty. Now, you can either just sort right through here, or scroll down, or you can hit sort. It tends to make it easier, obviously. And hit Kelty. There we go. And we're ready to hit load airway, and it loads all of the waypoints in between. Next, from Kelty, oops, wrong place, back. From Kelty, we're jumping onto another airway. So again, Kelty being the entry point, we're jumping onto the Q812, and we're going to be exiting at Zohan. So let's scroll down here. There's Zohan, and load airway once again. Now, as you can see here, from Zohan, we're supposed to fly direct to Idiom. Now, Idiom is also a transition point onto the star, which we already loaded. So you can see Zohan would take us from Zohan. The aircraft's going to fly direct to Idiom. So we don't need to add it again. Okay, so our flight plan is now complete. So we can now hit home and start getting ready to start the engines. And quick correction on that, we're not quite ready to start the engines, but we're close. Next thing we need to do is we need to figure out our trim setting. Now, unfortunately, the trim setting, you need to have your tooltips on in order to see it. So if you want to quickly do so, you just hit escape, go to your general options, go to accessibility, and cockpit tooltips. Unfortunately, at the moment, again, this is the only way to see what your trim setting is currently in this aircraft. So come down here, and now you can see what the trim setting is. Now, to figure out what trim setting we need, that's going to be an awesome part of this page here. We're going to take our center of gravity, which is 3079, as you guys saw here, and we'll use that number to follow the chart that we have over here. Here's our airplane CG, right about 307, not quite 31. Flaps 1 or 2, we'll be using flaps 2. Coming across, our trim setting is -4.5 degrees. So let's go ahead and set that real quick. The easiest way to do that is to simply just use your HOTAS if you have it mapped. Trying to use the scroll wheel will take absolutely forever. And there we go. Nose down, 4.5 degrees. And the next thing we need to do is set our speed bugs. So let's come down back to our FMS to complete our configuration. What we need now is the aircraft's current weight. So we're going to come up here. Well, actually, I'll show you guys. Trust me, this is a direct screenshot. Our current weight is 33,720 pounds, which puts us into this quadrant here with a runway greater than 5,800 feet. All right, so we're going to have V1, the speed at which the aircraft can no longer safely be stopped and takeoff must execute, at 121 knots. We have VR, the speed at which we begin pulling back to put the aircraft into the air, 122 knots. V2, the speed at which if the aircraft loses a single engine, it will continue to accelerate and climb. And finally, VFTO, our maximum takeoff speed, 185 knots, wheels must be off the ground. Hopefully we are up way before that. All right. So we're going to go ahead and set those speeds into our speed bugs today. So first one we said was 121 knots, which that did not take. There it goes. V rotate, 122 knots, 131 knots at V2, and 185 knots maximum takeoff speed. Turn on all of our speed bugs, and our performance numbers are now complete. So at this point, we are now ready to get the aircraft ready for startup. So at this point, we've already verified parking brake is set, flaps are retracted, spoilers are retracted, and throttles are at idle. So now we'll come up here and we will turn on our anti-collision lights, letting everyone know that the aircraft is getting ready to start. And then we'll come down and get our engines running. First thing we're going to do is open up the right engine cover and change it from stop to the run position, and then hit the right engine start switch. At the point we hit the right engine start switch, we can come forward to our ECAS page, or ICAS page, however you like to say it. And you can see N2 rolling. That's the inner fan, which starts speeding and starts spinning. As it spins, it generates air pressure over the larger fan, which we call N1. You'll see N1 begin to rotate, and we will hold here until we get to an idle position. All right, at this point, we can see that engine 2 is now at idle. Let's go back and repeat the process for engine 1. So again, lift the cover, put it into the run position, close the cover, should have closed the first time, and engine start. And same process as you can see, N2 is spinning, generating airflow over the large engine fan for N1, which will begin turning the main compressor. You have our fuel flow in pounds per minute, oil pressure in PSI, and oil temperature in Celsius. Total fuel on board, center tanks and 2 wing tanks, flat position. And unfortunately, this is supposed to be trim elevation, or actually, it's supposed to be the control surface position, but they are not currently modeled, unfortunately. You can see the spoilers come up as you generate left aileron, but that's about it. I can pull back on the stick all I want, push forward. Unfortunately, these don't model. And engine 1 is now approaching the idle position. So at this point, there we go. We'll come on over here, and left gen will go to reset first, then left gen on. Right gen, should be reset first, then right gen on. Bus ties need to now go to the open position as it separates the link, allowing each side to power its own bus. APU gen should go to the off position and come back down to the back and turn off the APU. And also at this point, we will come forward, come over, come up, and turn on any anti-ice that we need. We can go ahead and turn our pitot heat on, wing ice, engine, and tail set to normal. As it's supposed to be a pretty chill day up at altitude. All right, and now we will finish any cockpit configuration that we need to get taxied out onto the runway. All right, so stepping back up to our main seat here, we're going to swing on over to the autopilot panel for a moment. We're going to turn our flight directors on. We're going to set our speed to the manual position, and I leave it manual for pretty much the entire flight. It just makes it easier than trying to manage it through the FMS, which I'm not even sure is completely functional as of this time. So from here, I'm going to set our speed to the initial takeoff speed, which is going to be 185 knots. We're going to set our initial altitude up to 10,000 feet as our initial climb out. And actually, disregard that. Let's go to 12,000. We'll set it to 12,000 today. Okay. And that is all we need there. Then we will come down to the pilot PFD, touchscreen controller, excuse me. Our nav source, we're going to switch this over to the FMS, so that way we are following our autopilot route. PFD map settings, we can leave it as is for the moment, but eventually we'll be turning on our traffic advisory system. And I think we are ready to get ourselves on the road. Doing one last sweep through our checklist here, making sure we got everything. Nose trim is set, altitudes are set, speed settings set. So final step here is to turn on our emergency locator transmitter, or arm I should say, turn on our taxi lights, and we are ready to take the runway. All right, so now that we're just about all set for taxi, last thing we're going to do is, like I said, come down here and turn our transponder on. So we're going to come down to transponder. And there's a little bit of confusion here. I'm not quite sure how all of this works. So we're going to hope for on is going to give us everything that we need. Reason being is that if we switch, for example, actually, no, we can't do that. We're going to go TA only then. Well, first we'll start with altitude reporting according to the checklist. Notice that it puts this into a standby mode. This is our traffic avoidance or alert system. Okay, it lets us know of other air traffic that's in the air near us. Altitude reporting reports our altitude back to anyone who is pinging our transponder code, in this case, air traffic control. It lets them know what altitude we're at. When we switch to TA only, if we try to leave it here, TA stays off. So we switch to TA only. Now that verbiage tells me that only TA is on and that the transponder isn't active. However, the transponder does come up over here and give TA only. So this is a piece of information that unfortunately I haven't been able to find any solidified information on. So the procedure as current is going to be altitude reporting until we reach the runway. Once we reach the runway, we will turn on TA only and hope that all is well. Okay. All right. Other than that, we are ready for taxi. So let's go ahead and release the parking brake and get this aircraft out of here. Parking brake down. Slowly advancing the throttle. This is a really odd taxi turn here. We want to try to keep the aircraft below 10 knots when turning so she doesn't roll. Got to bring her real tight over here. And then from here, we'll taxi up to runway 15 and hold short. And here is runway 15 right. And lock her down. All right, so now we'll go ahead and set the aircraft for taxi. To save my feet, I am setting the parking brake. Not that's required. As long as you hold your feet on the brakes, you're good. Once again, double checking spoilers are retracted. We need to set flaps 2 for takeoff. Make sure that the auto ground spoilers are armed in the event of a rejected takeoff. V-speeds are displayed. Ground or pitot heat is selected and on. Weather radar, if weather is present, we got pretty clear skies, so I'm not going to worry about that today. We're going to come up top, turn the taxi light off, landing lights on, and pulse light on. From here, we're also going to come down and select our TA only for our traffic advisory system. And we are now ready to take the runway. Now I'm going to hold us here for just a second and show you guys a couple of control bindings that will make your lives quite a bit easier if you have them mapped. Okay, especially with this particular aircraft, and you'll understand why if you ever try it without doing this. So, first one here. Oh, hang on a second. Let me switch over to our... There we go. We're using this guy today. So, first is the auto throttle toga. You really want to make sure that you have that mapped. Otherwise, you have to depress the button down on the throttle itself, which is a little weird. And then finally, the big one here is the auto throttle. And it's because of the way we have to arm the auto throttle. We arm it a little bit differently than what the real world procedure would be. The real world procedure would be that we arm the auto throttle, then spool up to 50%. Once we spool up to 50%, the auto throttle will take over and control the speed of the aircraft. However, due to simulation limitations, the second we arm the auto throttle, the aircraft's going to start going. So we do it in the reverse. We're going to spool up to 50%, then arm the auto throttle, and we'll be good to go. All right, at this point we have the manual speed already set. We have 185 knots in the box, so we are going to be ready to roll. What we're going to be doing is looking for V1 and rotate. Once we get to V rotate, we will then begin pulling back the stick gently to about 7.5 degrees of climb. Once we verify a positive rate, we'll go gear up. At V2 plus 20 knots, we'll make sure to get the flaps up as quickly as possible. And this aircraft takes off very, very quickly. At 400 feet above ground level or higher, and the aircraft is stable, flight directors are on point with the aircraft current positioning, we will switch on the autopilot and switch to flight level control and then accelerate up to our 250 knots of climb up to 10,000 feet. And everything else, we'll catch you guys in just a second. So let's get out of here. So first thing we're going to do, arm the toga. You can get big hand right there, or a big identifier as you saw the nav system climbed up there. Next, speeding up to approximately 50%. There we go. And arming the auto throttle. Once the auto throttle is armed, the aircraft's going to take over. As the aircraft accelerates, here we go. There's rotate. Come on, baby, climb up. Looking for that 7.5 degrees. Gears coming up. Flaps are coming up as we're already hitting our speeds. Making sure the aircraft is stable. We are now accelerating our speed up to 250 knots. And I'm going to engage the autopilot. Now visually verify that everything is done. Flaps are up, good, gears up. And we can now engage flight level control. Now you can see the flight level control took us down to 235 knots, so we're going to accelerate back to 250. And now continue our climb up to 12,000 feet in this case. Easy peasy. And then now we'll also engage our nav mode. That was my fault. I thought I tapped it on my HOTAS, but it didn't register. That's all right. We're just now coming up on the turn, so caught it in time. So basically, should have been autopilot, flight level control, nav mode. And the only other thing that I missed, which honestly I do quite frequently if I were to call myself guilty, is to, when you line up with the runway, tap your heading knob here and it will align your heading marker with your current heading, basically giving you the runway heading in case you need to fly in heading mode. Oftentimes when using ATC, they'll tell you to fly runway heading until X amount of feet, and so that's a perfect example of when to use that, and instead of engaging nav mode, we would have engaged heading mode. Alright, let's go ahead and increase our altitude. We're going to take us up to 31,000 feet from here. Now you can see we're out of the climb. So from this point we need to go back into flight level control. And we're above 10,000 feet. So at this point, I'm going to select my speed bug and set us up for 270 knots for best speed, 290 knots if you want best climb rate. Above 10,000 feet, we can come up and turn our landing lights off. And the wing lights on if you had them. This thing climbs like a rocket, so be aware of that. And since today is just a tutorial and we're not using ATC, we can go ahead and set our cruise altitude. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Had the wrong bug selected. I really recommend binding your altitudes or your autopilot controls to your HOTAS if you can. It really makes a big difference as long as you don't do what I'm doing and keep hitting the wrong one. So we're up to 45,000 feet today. And actually, to keep with the guide, we're going to go to 44,000 because the guide shows 44,000 feet. But I think when flying west, we're supposed to be on the odd numbers is why I was changing that. But until I change it in the guide, I will leave it as is for this video. So it's really busy aircraft at takeoff, but so to be completely honest, I didn't like it when I first started flying it. It seemed like a very unfriendly bird. As we're approaching 18,000 feet, we're going to tap our barometer to switch back into the default, or the standard of 29902, not default. Anyway, but as I flew it more and more, I've really found a new love for this aircraft. It's fun, it's fast, it's gorgeous looking. And with the modification that is included in the guide, and again linked down in the description to the mod that I'm using for this aircraft, it really dramatically improves the functionality of this aircraft. I highly recommend it, guys. Give it a shot, follow these procedures, hopefully doing a better job than I'm doing. But it's always weird when you're teaching it. It really is. You know, I can draw it out in the guide with no problem. But then when I start actually doing it in practice and trying to record it, like, I think I spend too much time second guessing myself. Am I at the right location? Am I at the right spot? Is this what I'm supposed to be saying? You know, and then you find yourself tripping over your words like a dork. But anyway, so from here, we have our altimeter set. The next thing that we're going to be looking for is at about flight level 280-ish. We'll be switching over from Mach up, or from indicated airspeed, which is here, over to Mach. And I'll show you guys that in just a minute. Alright, so as we're approaching almost 28,000 feet, what I'm going to do here is come to our speed knob, and I'm just going to give it a click. Okay? And it doesn't look like it did. Oh, yes, it did. And it changes your speed tape up here from speed to Mach. And then we're going to increase our speed to Mach 0.80 for climb. Oops, I think I did something. Did I bounce it? Yep, drives me crazy. Here, let me use my HOTAS. This is why I do that, exactly. Oh, now we're going the other direction. Okay. And we're going to climb us out to Mach 0.80. All right, and we'll be using Mach 0.80 all the way until we get to our cruise altitude. Once we get to our cruise altitude, we'll accelerate to Mach 0.82. All right, so I will see you guys in a bit when we get up to cruise. All right, so we have reached our cruise altitude. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and increase our speed to Mach 0.82. Now, we have a vicious headwind of 51 knots. So whether or not the aircraft can actually hit that speed, we'll just have to see what happens, but we're going to get as close to it as possible. I have found for this particular version of the Cessna Citation Longitude for Microsoft Flight Simulator, going any faster than Mach 0.82 and you get into overspeeding the aircraft. So just keep that in mind, that Mach 0.82 seems to be about the max that we can do. All right, so I will catch you guys as it comes closer to time to plan our descent. All right, guys, so we are still quite a ways out, probably about 300, 400 miles away, but we're going to start thinking about our descent for the sake of this video. That way, you know, we have plenty of time to react. So a link down the description below to this top of descent calculator. This is what I use. I find it to be pretty on point for the most part. Obviously, it's just a calculator, and a lot of this stuff is aircraft specific, but for simulation purposes, I find that it actually works really, really well. So let's bring this down and you guys can see where we're at. So first, starting altitude, 44,000 feet is our cruise level. Ending altitude, I use 10,000 feet. And where I'm getting 10,000 feet from is either the star or the approach plate. So here's the approach plate, but let's come down to the star. That's what we're going to be interested in here for today's use. And we're going to be coming in off of Idiom, coming through Shea, you know, and coming down through German here, and then descending down. And our flight plan takes us down here through Linked into Croy, and then from Croy we actually jump over into the transition onto the approach. So what we're interested in here is you can see that these lines, the underscore line here, or the underline, indicates that we have to be above 12,000 at 280 knots. But then we come down here to Wolves and then come down into Lakeland, and you can see we need to be above 8,000. So we can sort of, do some deduction here and, basically call it at Wolves we need to be at 10,000 feet. So that's what I'm using today. I'm calling it that at Wolves or just before I need to be at 12,000 or at 10,000 feet. And the reason why I do that versus setting all the way down to the landing elevation is I find it easier, because as long as you're at 10,000 feet, as you can see here, from here, we can get down 10,000, we can get down to 7,000 from here and then jump onto the approach. It's a lot simpler to manage, because once you get below 10,000 feet, all right, your speeds are changing constantly, your altitudes are changing constantly, you have turns onto the approaches and things that are going to change and offer a lot more deviation than what you get by simply, picking a location, at 10,000 or above. And I hope that makes sense. I find 10,000 feet mark to be a much simpler way to go, and I find that I get much more accurate calculations as far as when to descend. Okay, so that's what we're using today. We're going to call Wolves here 10,000 feet. All right, and so I'm going from 44,000 down to 10,000 feet. Starting speed is going to be about 410 knots, give or take. Now we're using ground speed. Okay, that's very important that you understand you want ground speed when you're calculating this. You don't want airspeed. Okay, so ground speed, we're going to talk about 410 because we're going to be reducing down to Mach 0.80. And actually, I could probably look that up, and that's probably not quite right. But again, close enough. Ending speed. This is another reason why I use 10,000 feet. Ending speed, we know that we're going to be at 250 knots. We know that, okay? And then wind speed, this is going to be positive number if you have a headwind, negative number if it's a tailwind. Now, at the time that I calculated this, we could actually recalculate this for 47 knots, and I'll probably recalculate again as we get a little bit closer. Okay, 47 knot headwind, as we can see here. Wind's coming from 320 at 48 knots. Glide slope, we're looking for 3 degrees. We're going to descend at 2,000 feet per minute, which means our top of descent needs to be 128 miles away from our target location of Wolves. And it'll take us about 20 minutes to get down to that altitude. Okay, so that's how I plot my top of descent. If again, a link to this will be down in the description below, guys. And then in the guide, there's actually a manual calculation process which gets you just about the same number. So here is the top of descent calculator. I break down how to use it, etc. I break down what I'm doing with the calculator, how I figured all that out, right? And then here is the formula that I walk through on how to basically get similar information. Okay, and you can see, for example, here that the math here that I did got us to 116 miles, and then our calculator, what did I do with it, if I can remember, got us at 128 miles. So 10-12 mile variance. It's going to be one of those situations. But don't mind the rocking here, guys. That has nothing to do with the aircraft. It's actually because I have time accelerated. The sim rate is increased just to sort of speed things up a bit so I can get this video out for you guys. All right, so just didn't want anyone seeing that going, why is your plane rocking? It's my fault. It's because I had time sped up. But anyways, so I will see you guys as we get closer to our descent point at about 140 miles. What we're going to do, remaining level, is we're going to slow the aircraft down to our descent speed, and then once we reach our descent point, we'll change our altitude. Okay, so we're actually a little closer than I anticipated. We're already past, I think, our point, so I'm going to show you guys how we're going to check that. We're going to go to our flight plan here, and we're going to come down until we find that Wolves waypoint. And actually, it doesn't look like it's on here, so we'll use Bakes as a good example. And we'll go to waypoint information. And we're 124 miles out. Yeah, so we're just about, with that actually works out because Wolves is about 10 miles past that. So we're pretty much right on point. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to slow the aircraft down to Mach 0.80. That's close enough there. So now I'm going to change our altitude bug down to 10,000 feet. Oops. I always go too far. Just a little tap. Then I'm going to go into vertical speed mode, and I'm going to descend us at 2,000 feet per minute. And we should arrive at 10,000 feet just before the Wolves waypoint, which we'll be able to track on our Navigraph charts. All right, so I will see you guys at about 28 to 30,000 feet, in which we'll need to change our speed. Just a real quick disclaimer, guys. As we are descending here, I know many of you are aware of the working title G3000, G5000 suites now having the ability to calculate top of descent. The reason why I did not do that in this particular video is because I did not put that into the guide yet. I want this video to be a more or less exact representation of what's in the guide, so that way there's no confusion. So yes, for those of you who are aware of it, you probably know how to use it by now. But that is the reason why I left that particular portion out of the guide at this time. All right, I'll see you guys in a bit. All right, so this is a good time to address the next part of this. As you can see, our speed is increasing as we're descending. Okay, and our true airspeed is increasing. What's going to happen if we don't adjust this soon and get out of Mach mode is we're going to overspeed the aircraft. So we're going to go ahead and come in here, give that a tap to go back to knots, and we're going to reduce it down to 290 knots according to our descent profile. There we go. Okay, and that'll help keep us from overspeeding the aircraft as we continue through our descent. So I'll catch you guys at 18,000 feet when we set our altimeter. All right, so to make you guys aware of something, at German, we're supposed to be at 280 knots at flight level 220 or above. So we need to adjust some things here. So what I'm going to do is take our altimeter, or altitude target, and change it up to 22,000 because we're going to pass it. And then we need to take our speed and reduce down to 280 knots. So as we can see here, reduce this a bit. There we are. There's the German waypoint. And we're already at 24,000 feet. And let's go back to vertical speed because we're not quite there yet. Oops. There we go. And this way we stay on target. Now the next section that we're going to want to be taking a look at here in just a minute, and we'll do that after we set our arriving altimeter, is we need to set our weights and balances for our approach speed. So I will catch you guys in just a few minutes, but be on the lookout for that next. All right, so we've reached the muscle waypoint, so now we're going to continue our descent down to 17,000 as according to our chart. And again, just go back into vertical speed, kick it up into 2,000 feet per minute. And we can now see us tracking on the Navigraph charts. And from here, we're going to go ahead and calculate our speeds here for approach. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our current weight, 29,284 pounds. We're going to take a look at our chart. We can see that we're in the range of 29,500 pounds. Now, you can do the math if you want to get the exact numbers. I just take these two. So we're going to have our V reference speed, so our speed at the time we're crossing the threshold should be 168 or 116 knots. And then our approach speed, which is 128 knots. And that's what we're going to be using basically below 10,000 feet. A little bit afterwards, but you guys catch the gist. So what we're going to do is come down to our speed bugs again. And we're on landing and approach speed. Actually, back up, make sure, I can't remember if I hit the right one. Yep. So approach speed, we are looking at 128 knots. And reference speed is 116 knots. Now, it's going to be 116 knots plus our wind coefficient, or wind speed. But we might adjust this in a minute. So, but for now, we're going to put 116 knots, but we may change that as we get lower. And you can do this later on. I just did it early for right now, given the fact that we have the tutorial process going. So I want to make sure that I get everything in without rushing it. And we are crossing down below 18,000 feet, so we're going to start setting our altimeter. And the altimeter, according to Google, for KMSP is 2979. So we're going to bring that down. Come on. Oops, went too far. There we go. And we are crossing the muscle waypoint, so I'm going to continue our descent down to now 12,000, which is our target for the next waypoint. We need to be above 12,000 and still maintaining 280 knots. Vertical speed re-enabled. You can see here we're tracking onto bakes now. Once we get close to bakes, I'll be adjusting us down to 10,000 as we start to turn towards the transition onto the approach. Now I just realized while looking at some of the information that we actually made a slight error in the transition point that I picked for our approach, and I'll show you what I mean. So we're coming down through this way to Croy, okay, which means we're actually above the airfield. We're north of it. So if we come down to the approaches and we select runway 30 left that we're going to be using, we're actually coming from up here. So we're going to change our transition point to Giku here. So let's go ahead and get that going real quick. Going to go home, going to go to procedures, and we're going to go to, approach, excuse me, and change the transition back to Giku, hit load, and hit home, flight plan. We should be good to go. And there we go. Which, by the way, that now makes more sense, because look what we have. We now have the Wolves waypoint as we were expecting to have. And we're now from Bakes to Wolves, so we're going to decrease our altitude even further down to 10,000. And you can see we went back into altitude hold, so re-engage vertical speed. Now, as we're approaching 10,000 feet, we also need to be reducing our speed, so let's get us down to 250 knots. And if for any reason you feel like you're not going to make it, simply reduce your descent rate until the aircraft reaches your target speed. And then by Giku, we'll be looking for 7,000. We're approaching 10,000 feet, so we're going to bring the landing lights back on. And we'll be holding here until we reach the Wolves waypoint. Now, at this stage in our flight, we can also start setting up our nav radio. So, we're going to come down here. We're going to go to audios and radios. We're going to find nav 1, and we're going to be changing this frequency. The frequency we're going to be needing is the ILS frequency for runway 30 left, which is right here, 110.3. So, we're going to type in 1103, and we're just going to go straight to transfer with such as the active channel. Okay. And that way, when we switch to the VOR for the ILS approach, it's already programmed in and ready to go. Now, as we are getting ready to make our turn to Giku, we have a couple of steps that we need to take. First off, is we need to drop our altitude down to 7,000 feet. Oops, going too low there. Come on. That's why I don't like using this. And we're going to set our vertical speed, but this time we're only going to go down 1,000 feet per minute. That's going to bring us closer to the descent rate necessary to establish the glide slope. The other thing is we have a speed restriction at Giku for 210 knots, so we need to slow our aircraft down. There's 210 knots. Anything below 250, we need to be at flaps 1. Anything below 230 knots, we need to be at flaps 2. As long as you have the mod installed, you will not get the landing gear warning. And from here, we'll continue on, and it's almost time to start configuring for the approach. All right, our next process here is we're going to need to set our minimums here. Now we're going to be doing a Category 1 ILS landing. So what we're looking at here is the decision height of 1,023 feet. That's going to be above mean sea level. Or we have 200 feet, which is going to be the radar altimeter. So we're going to set 200 feet as our minimums. And basically what that means is by 200 feet, if you have not acquired visual acquisition of the runway, you need to go around. So we're going to go minimums. We're going to type 200, press enter. We're going to go back to minimums, go minimums here, and we're going to set radio for radar altimeter. Press enter here, and you can see it pops up here. Radar altimeter, minimums, 200 feet. Okay? And we're looking right on track to be at the 7,000 feet by Giku. We're approaching our 7,000 foot mark, and we're just going to hold tight until we reach our next altitude. All right, guys, so a real quick disclaimer. At this point, I actually had a crash to desktop on the simulator. I had to redo an error start, and then on top of that, my microphone was not recording. So I'm trying to do a voiceover. I don't typically do these, so I'm going to do my best to keep you guys up to date here. So what we're talking about here is the glide slope is now acquired by the system, but when it is grayed out, it can't be tracked because we're not actually using the nav source that is tracking it. So what we did there was we went down to the Pilot TSC and we switched over to the nav1 source so we can start tracking the localizer. Notice the green G and the diamond have now turned green, indicating that's locked. We've put the aircraft into approach mode since it's acquired. Now, the biggest thing about approach mode is you want to make sure that you're not using vertical speed at the same time to descend. If you have vertical speed engaged and you hit approach mode, your aircraft will still continue to descend using the vertical speed mode. Much of the landing configuration that we had previously set was not correct because of the error start. The simulator does not start it correctly. So if you notice some weird controls, then that's the reason why. At this point, what we're doing is adjusting the time and day and getting everything set back the way it was supposed to be. So we turned the landing lights on as we were below 10,000 feet. We want to make sure the ground spoilers are armed for our landing. The ELT is still armed. And we're turning on to the approach. If you look at the CDI, you can see that we're getting ready to track the runway, which will line us up at the center. The APU Gen was turned on by the air start, so we turned the APU Gen off. That should not have been on, so don't let that fool you. At this point, if you notice the green diamond next to the altitude identifier or indicator, we are tracking the glide slope and locked on. Now we're going to set our approach speeds. Now you have to set these manually. Don't use the default. This is going to be based on our weight. I'm going to bring up a chart here. And our weight is currently at 29,300-ish. And so you can set the exact calculations if you feel like doing the math, but I use the 116, the 128. Now with the 116 speed, that's our VREF. That's what we should be at as we're crossing the threshold of the runway. Now you're going to want to set your VREF at whatever your wind component is plus the VREF speed. So for example, if you have a 3-knot headwind, you would set your VREF speed at 119. And that's what I'm doing here is adjusting the wind to match what it should have been for our configuration landing on runway 30 left. So we're just adding a wind layer. We're just changing the wind layer, I should say. Now, anytime you have any kind of a headwind, you want to make sure that at the very least you're 3 knots above. So even if you have a 2-knot headwind, you still want to be 3 knots is what you're going to calculate for your wind speed for your VREF. which is why we're doing 119 knots. So 116 plus 3. If you don't have any headwind or any wind at all, you can simply leave it at the whatever your VREF configuration is. We have our approach speed, which is 128 knots, and that's the speed we're going to use once we get down to the approach for the runway. It's important to remember our flap speed. Anything below 180 knots, we should be at full flaps. In order to be at full flaps, you must have the landing gear down. At this point, we're setting our speed down to our approach speed of 128 knots. Once we get down to 128, we'll go ahead and drop full flaps and drop the landing gear. So there's gear down and full flaps. And the air start turned off the recog lights and the pulse lights, so we turned those back on. I tried to catch most everything when I restarted, but to say the least, I was less than happy with Microsoft Flight Simulator, so I missed a few things, unfortunately. I was pretty angry, not gonna lie. And again, here I'm just talking about the reference speeds again and how I got to them. So now I'm going to show you guys where you find your total weight. Is right down there at the bottom. And then again, referencing, you can see we're above the 27,005, but below the 29.5, which is why we're using the 116 and the 128. And you'll be happy to know that none of these weird behaviors are in the guide. When I flew the guide, flew the flight to make the guide and take my screenshots, everything worked perfectly. So hopefully everything continues to smooth out as we come in. Notice the altitude. I can't remember if I mentioned this previously in the video. The altitude is set at 1,300 feet. That is our go-around or missed approach altitude. You can see the glide slope is locked, the localizer is locked, speed is set, and the auto throttle is engaged with the autopilot. Now simply identifying the symbols there at the top of the PFD. Here you'll see me switch the speed back to FMS. I recommend not doing that, and that's what I was talking about. As it changes your speed, you can see it rotated back up to 144 knots. So you want to make sure that you keep yourself on manual. I just find with the Longitude, manual really is the best way to go. Gives you full control of the aircraft. That's why I recommend mapping all of your controls, your autopilot controls, to your flight sticks. We tapped the heading knob to align the aircraft or the heading indicator with our current heading, which is the runway heading. And that is for the sake of, again, if we have a missed approach, we can simply go into heading mode and go into toga and climb back out. Looking for about 500 feet on the radar altimeter. Once we get to about 500 feet, we'll reduce our speed down to the 119 knots. Now, you may find that the speed doesn't actually get down to where it belongs. If you're in that situation, reduce the programmed speed until you hit your indicated airspeed correctly. Otherwise, you're going to come in hot. The other thing that you're going to witness here is even though we have a crosswind coming from the right side of the aircraft, it starts pushing over to the right. All I can think of is that's the some of the weather nonsense that tends to happen with the live weather. I don't typically like using live weather, and that's why, but if you'll watch here, we start getting pushed off to the right and off course. So very shortly here, I'm going to disengage the autopilot, disengage auto throttle, and take control of the aircraft and line this back up. Now the idea here is that 50 feet of radar altimeter is when you want to disengage the auto throttle. Okay, so there's that push I was telling you about. It happened right as I crossed those trees. So I disengaged the autopilot, took control of the aircraft, reduced my throttles, and ideally you want to be at about 3 degrees of flare at 20 feet. So again, this was sort of a last minute chaos, but not the way I wanted it. So boom, hard landing there, unfortunately. You're going to engage your thrust reversers. And we open the thrust buckets up until about 60 knots. Once 60 knots is achieved, we close the thrust buckets, start applying wheel brake, and slowly taxi safely off of the runway. Now when taxiing off of the runway, we want to be sure that we completely clear the runway, meaning crossing the yellow checkered lines with the tail of the aircraft. We want to make sure no part of our aircraft is in the active runway source or path, and then we'll use the taxiway to do our cleanup. So here's our taxi off. And you can see the red and yellow lines there. That's the runway threshold. We're going to need to make sure that we cross those lines. And then we'll stop the aircraft and do our cleanup. So again, making sure the tail has cleared the runway. And now let's do our cleanup. So we have flaps up. Make sure spoilers are disarmed. Make sure our landing lights are turned off. And make sure taxi light is turned on and the pulse light is turned off as well. And from here, we can now taxi out to our parking location. Now, if I like to start the APU here. That way, if you are going for a turnaround state. So if you're not planning on shutting the aircraft down to cold and dark, this is a good time to turn the APU on. That way when you get to parking, it's already ready to go. So from here, we'll walk through the turnaround state. We've parked the aircraft. You want your parking brake up. We want taxi light off. Anti-ice, make sure it's off. The air start turned them off, unfortunately. I had them on. And we're going to open the gates covers for our engines and turn the engines off. You'll get this menu again. At this point, turn the right gen off, turn the left gen off, turn APU gen on, as long as the APU is on and running, and open or close the bus ties. And there, you are now ready for your turnaround state. And if you wish to, you can reprogram the aircraft and refuel for the next flight and get on out of the way. Cold and dark, we're going to turn our flight directors off. Shut the APU off. First the gen, then the APU. Any remaining exterior lights. Right battery, left battery, standby battery. And now you have a cold and dark aircraft. I do hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I know that ending, unfortunately, was a little chaotic, not the way I had it planned. Again, the PDF tutorial guide that can be found by being a Patreon member is perfect. Doesn't have any of those weird behaviors in it. So guys, I'm going to wrap this one up. I wish you all well, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, guys.